more time. Okay, thank you for your patience. Every year, Purim asks us to put on a costume. And we dress as queens, and we dress as fools, and we dress up as Mordecai and Haman, and even sometimes as each other, just laughing and having fun. We put on masks. And the tradition whispers to us that this is the deepest truth of the holiday. On Purim, every single thing is hidden. The name of God does not appear once in the entire Megillah. Not once. And the rabbis, of course, they noticed. They made whole bunches of explanations, but the most important one is the idea of Hester Panim, the hidden face of God. And I kind of think about God also in the timeline of history. God acts in hidden ways. Not announced, but hidden. Not overt, rather covert. And most frequently, we see God tucked into the folds of ordinary human life, inside of a woman's courage, inside of a decision of a community to do something bigger, better, and greater than themselves. This year, though, we arrived with Purim, wearing a mask we did not choose. 7 days ago, bombs began falling on Tehran, on the same Tehran in the same Persia that's mentioned in the book of Esther, whose ancient predecessor once threatened to annihilate every Jew in every province of the known world. I'm sure you've heard a similar comparison. An Israeli official, Mitchell Barak, a political pollster who works for Netanyahu, said loudly, "It's fitting that this is the holiday of Purim, which also marks the survival of the Jewish people over a threat from Persia 2,500 years ago." And I understand the pull of that story. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in the way I imagine you do, something old and animalistic, that deeper part of us that's like, yes, we're gonna survive. We're gonna do something that we've been afraid of doing for a very long time. And then I think about the loss in Tehran. The 160 girls in a school died. That people are being displaced. The bombs are flying and killing American soldiers. And I feel something else entirely. Something that also lives in me, in my chest, it's lower and heavier. And both the feeling of triumph of engaging in doing something and the recognition that doing something causes pain and loss. That conflicting feeling, I think, is also in the book of Esther. And that's exactly where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be reminding us to have conflicted, complex feelings. Because the book of Esther in itself refuses to be simple. Esther, a hero, she hid herself for many years. Mordecai, righteous, refusing to bow. Haman, just this villain, but not really quite. He's like the penultimate villain who's associated with Amalek, the most evil character in the entire Bible, highlighting just how evil he really was. And the king, neither good nor bad, distracted, manipulable, drunk half the time. They're just characters of people at their most extremes. And the rabbis gave us this custom of blotting out that evil name of Haman, of shaking the grogger, of drowning it with noise, of erasing it and refusing to simply let it stand. But they also gave us this lesson that we can't just celebrate the death of Haman for when Haman hung on the same gallows that he chose to put the Jews on, or his sons were there too, and remind us of this midrash that appears in our Haggadah, where it says, God said, "My creatures are drowning." And I want you to sit with that just for a second. My creatures are drowning. My creatures are drowning. As the sea closes in over the soldier's head. I don't want us to think about it simply on one level only. I want us to think about it more deeply in our kishkis. Can you imagine what the soldier saw when the last thing was? The water and sky closing in? And somewhere in the fabric of creation, God feels it, that specific loss, that specific body, that specific last breath that turns to the angels and says, not now. We're not singing and celebrating right now. As tonight, we know that there are parents in Tel Aviv sitting in bomb shelters with children, recalling Purim stories and celebrations that just happened a week before, where they were still able to go out. I want us to feel the weight of that child in their lap and force in a steady voice. Esther went before the king. Boom. The missiles are outside, and the parent continues, but she was not afraid. And right now, there are mothers also sitting in Tehran, in rubbles of neighborhoods that they have lived their entire life. They're not our enemies. They're also the creature of God. They are created just as we are in the image of God. And God is with them too, in the dust, in the dark, in the Hester Panim, the face hidden in the chaos. I believe that. I believe that because God is not only with us. That would be a very small God. Rather, I think God is greater than that. The Megillah ends with the Jews celebrating v'sason v'simcha, in joy and gladness. It records, though, without flinching, the number of people killed. The text doesn't look away from the body count. It names it, as if the authors knew you cannot have salvation without sitting with what the cost of salvation truly is. I can't tell you tonight what God wants in Tehran. I can't tell you whether the strikes are just or unjust, wise or catastrophic, though we all have opinions of what should or shouldn't happen. But these are real questions that take real consideration and affect people in a very serious way. We need to wrestle those questions, not with a meme, not with a 30-second soundbite, but think about it deeply. And I refuse to turn all of those questions into something short and punchy. The book of Esther may be short and may be full of laughter, but it also had depth. In moments of hiddenness, the narrative was still present. In this case, I think, in a weird way, we are part of that narrative. We can't see the shape of what that narrative is, of the meaning of this very moment. We don't know if it's part of a Purim story or a different kind of story entirely. What we do know, what Jewish tradition has taught us for thousands of years, is that you can survive not knowing, that you can hold terror and hope in the same body, that lador vador, from generation to generation, our ancestors looked out in the world and they saw it on fire, and yet they still lit those same Shabbos candles that we have and we lit this evening in our sanctuary. They still read the Megillah, they still studied Torah, they still dressed their kids in costumes and pressed sweets into each other's hands and said, we are still here. So tonight we remember putting on masks a week ago. Not because the world was funnier then than it is today, not because the danger isn't real, but because that's what we do as Jews. We perform survival even before we feel it. Na'aseh v'nishma is a phrase that the rabbis teach. We will do, and we will listen, and we will understand by doing. When we rattle our groggers to drown out Haman's name, Haman, this Haman, every Haman, it's not because the noise will stop the bombs, but the silence, by the way, in the face of evil is its own kind of defeat. And somewhere in the noise, in the chaos, in the costumes, in the hamantash, in the grief, and the fear, there is life too. Somewhere in all of that, if you let yourself feel, instead of just thinking cerebrally, instead of just reacting to some short meme, you can feel the complexity that is. May you notice that you are here, that you are breathing, that we are together, that Hester Panim, the face is hidden, and yet still there. Shabbat Shalom.